Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagoshnik. Thank you so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin can and string, we have our analyst and co-host. He is a contributor to the Daily Norseman, along with other blogs around the internet. He is Arif Hassan. Arif, how you doing?
I'm good, man. Well, I'm terrible, but I'm good. How are you?
I'm terrible, but for promotional purposes of the show, I'm fine. I'm well adjusted. Sunday didn't happen, so we have nothing to talk about. We can just move on to the preview for the Cardinals game, right? Absolutely nothing happened this weekend. It was great. No one got injured.
It's crazy how we had another bye week. I just didn't expect that to happen.
It's nice of Roger Goodell to reward us after all the terrible ref play that happened. It's nice that we're getting rewarded. So we have plenty of stuff to talk about this week, as far as the Seahawks game and everything. We're going to do something different. Nobody really wants to sit here and it's Wednesday. We don't want to sit here and recap the Seahawks blowout in the typical, this is how the offensive line played, this is how the defensive line played. These are the people who, broke their legs during the game or something. We don't need to do that. We don't need to sit here and talk about the specifics on Terrence Newman's play. What we will do, however, is do a brief summary of the game, some of the high points, some of the low points, and there are lows, and then we have a massive mailbag to go through. And I feel like the mailbag is going to do a better job as to picking apart the game specifically than we will just doing an overview. So we'll do a little bit of an overview, and then we'll jump into a pretty massive mailbag. But before we do all that, we are a listener-supported show. This is a show that it does not have ads for things. We like to just go straight from the listeners. We appreciate anything we can get from listeners donating to keep this show as ad-free as possible, and which keeps the quality up too. So we appreciate that. We have a new sustaining member, Eric Jensen on Patreon, has given us $5 a month. Thank you, Eric, so much. We are just trying to keep the lights on and just trying to keep this as ad-free as possible. If you would like to donate to Norse Code, you can do so one of two different ways. You can do so at the norsecodepodcast.com website. At the very bottom of the page, you'll see a donate button. You can go ahead and click on that. That's just straight through PayPal. You can also donate through Patreon at patreon.com/norsecode. I believe that is the link for the Patreon. So if you have any questions on that, please just let us know. But we're pretty happy with what we've received so far. Again, we're just trying to keep the lights on and trying to keep this Vikings ship moving. And I suppose before we get into the recap, there's a couple of really interesting pieces that have come out, both on Vikings Journal and on the Daily Norseman, that we both felt were important to talk about. And the first one is a really great piece about Adrian Peterson and Teddy Bridgewater, and the question of whether or not they can coexist in the same offense. And basically just saying that something's got to give.
Yeah, and that's the title of the piece. I thought it was an interesting piece. I thought it was well done. I do think that there are some issues with the piece. I don't know if it was covered in the comments. There's 560 comments, so I wouldn't be surprised if someone brought them up. But the basic premise of the piece is that when you take a look at the splits, so when you take a look at Adrian Peterson when he's running under center, he's averaging 5.4 yards an attempt. He has all of 8 of his touchdowns when the QB is under center in 55 first downs. Under shotgun, he's had 31 carries for 53 yards or 1.7 yards per attempt. So that's a huge disparity. And then therefore, obviously, none of the touchdowns, only 2 first downs. And then the other part of this piece indicates that Bridgewater, in his attempts under shotgun, he has a 60% completion rate. He has 659 yards in 84 attempts, and only 2 of his touchdowns and 2 of his interceptions. And so that comes out to let me do the math real quick. That comes out to 7.8 yards an attempt, which is actually not terrible But the lower completion rate and the higher interception rate tends to balance out when you take a look at it like from a passer rating perspective or anything like that. And then when you take a look at it, his completion rate under shotgun, it's higher at 67%, slightly lower yards per attempt, but a 6-to-5 touchdown to interception ratio. So, and that kind of follows through when you take a look at his rookie season too. There's a couple of issues that I have with the piece, but I do think that there is some fundamental truth to it. I think the first issue is that yes, his yards per attempt is actually higher when he's under center. So I think that there's something to parse there. I think if you're going to take that small sample of attempts under center, I think that looking at things like interception rate and touchdown rate's not great. Even when you take a look at yards per attempt, it's not very good. And completion rate only tells a very small part of the story. But I think the second thing is you have to take a look at sort of usage patterns. I think that you're just more likely to see, shotgun on third and long than you are to see a quarterback under center. You're more likely to see play action passing when the quarterback's under center than you are to see, in shotgun. So I think there's a lot, and you're going to see different looks from the defense. You're going to see a lot more nickel defenses in shotgun than you are with the quarterback under center and stuff like that. And so, if Bridgewater is better against certain types of defenses, or if you're more likely to see a blitz under certain defenses, or, anything like that, if he's bad at play action, or in this case, because his yards per attempt is higher under center than it is under shotgun, at least my quick math says that, maybe I'm wrong, then I think that complicates things a lot. So I think that looking at Bridgewater in terms of whether or not he's under center and under shotgun statistically, I think there's some problems, but I think that there's definitely a problem with Adrian Peterson under center versus under shotgun, because I think that it's not just the gap in yards per attempt, which is so huge, but I think also he definitely looks a lot more uncomfortable. And I will say Bridgewater is more comfortable in shotgun than he is under center. I think that bad interception that he threw in the Atlanta game, and it's not that bad because Ricardo Allen still had to make a big play. That has to do with some broken footwork under center. So I think there's some problems with the piece. I think that Bridgewater's numbers don't speak to how effective he is under center versus under shotgun, and I think that all of those different components to what goes into a quarterback's passer rating make it kind of complicated or difficult. But I think that for Adrian, I think that this is a real concern because I do kind of want to see Teddy in shotgun more, and I think that you hurt his ability to do that with Adrian on the field. So, yeah, and also I think it makes the offense predictable. You're just much more likely to run it under center than you are to pass it, and you're much more likely to pass it in shotgun than you are to run it. So I think that's another problem if one of the players is uncomfortable in one of those situations. So I think it's a good piece. I think it's not that great because I think from a rate perspective, Teddy does still look better under center than he does under shotgun. And then I think that play action passing and third down usage rate really complicates things. But I do think that Peterson and Bridgewater are not really comfortable with each other.
It's kind of obvious watching that Bridgewater would rather take another step back just because of how, and it makes more sense too, if a quarterback is playing in shotgun with a shoddy offensive line, you're giving him a chance. Even watching Peyton Manning at the beginning of the year, Manning physically is not able to get out of the way of anything, but he needs that extra time to sit back, read it, and move. So it makes more sense for Bridgewater to sit in shotgun with the injuries we've had and with the problems, but it just doesn't end up working with Adrian and his running style. So it's difficult to kind of figure out which one's going to be the better option, but it's really difficult to sit and watch this on a Sunday when things are not going well, and when you're thinking to yourself, Adrian should probably get more touches, but there's just no way that it's going to make any sense for it to come back from shotgun. If only Adrian were a few years younger and could learn to run from shotgun a little easier, and if he wasn't such a dynamic back from the Yeah,
I think one thing to keep in mind too is we recorded the show actually after we recorded the previous show, which is going to preview the Cardinals game, and I mentioned it in that show, so you're going to hear it again. I do think that when the Vikings do acquire a new running back, either a new starting one by keeping Jerick McKinnon on the roster and making him the starting running back, which I approve of, or finding a new running back in free agency or out of the draft, you're going to have a running back who's familiar with running out of a lot of different styles, or at least familiar with running out of shotgun the way the college game is going. So it's not going to be a long-term problem if Teddy continues to play for the Vikings. So I think that this is definitely a short-term issue. I think that the issue is a little bit complicated by the fact that Teddy isn't doing as bad under center, I think, as the piece kind of implies. But I think that you're right. I think that you want to pass out a shotgun a lot more often if you've got a bad offensive line, and it does make it difficult to disguise your intentions because Adrian Peterson is just not used to, or whatever. He just can't seem to adapt to the shotgun running game. So yeah, I don't know. It's certainly worth consideration, and I think it's something you want to think about going forward. But I'm still not as upset about the splits, or at least I'm not upset about the splits for the same reason I think as Chris is. I think the bigger issue is that you can't disguise your offense.
No. It doesn't help if we run on 1st and 10 every single possession either, but it'd be nice if we had just a little bit of subterfuge, just a little bit of a wrinkle where you couldn't just figure out what the hell we were going to do right away.
Right.
But the other piece we wanted to briefly mention is something that's on VikingsJournal.com, which is an article defending Mike Wallace. Personally, yeah, I was surprised that Mike Wallace didn't drop this thing halfway through it. Like it's an interesting piece, but the Mike Wallace defenders, I feel like this was just one of those like, what's an angle that no one could possibly take? I know. Let's defend. Did they write an article last year defending Adrian Peterson's right to scold his children? Like, what's the one take that no one else is going to have this year? So let's talk about defending Mike Wallace, or at least this article defending Mike Wallace.
Yeah, I was obviously, like you said, I'm kind of surprised to see this piece. I thought I would actually see something maybe a little bit interesting from like a film study perspective or whatever. But most of the piece, and it's not posted. It's posted on VikingsJournal.com, but I don't think it's posted by any of the writers. It's written by PurplePDSD.com. I've met the guy who runs the site, and he, he's pretty active on Reddit too, and he's talking about a lot of the stuff that he's seen on Reddit. A lot of people, according to him, and he's probably right, are pretty upset with Wallace. I am too. They've called him ineffective. They said they should bench him. He looks lazy, according to some people. And so, this person, he actually writes a pretty long piece in the blog, and then when it gets reposted at Vikings Journal, it gets shortened up a little bit. But the full piece, I guess, says that when you take a look at some of the stuff that's happening with Mike Wallace, he's actually getting overthrown. He's in the right place. And when you take a look at some dimensions of his effort, like blocking, a lot of his blocking, looks pretty good. And then he points to like a Stephon Diggs, screen pass that I think goes for a touchdown, or very nearly. And so it looks like, a guy who's trying or whatever. And I think that there's, like a couple of things to bring up. And again, it's a very lengthy piece, so I won't be able to touch on everything. But I think that, a couple of things are that whatever the reason, whether or not Mike Wallace is good or bad might be irrelevant. Whatever the reason, Mike Wallace and Teddy Bridgewater are not connecting, right? And maybe Teddy Bridgewater is doing, maybe it's all Teddy Bridgewater's fault. He's overthrowing Mike Wallace or throwing it, late to Mike Wallace or whatever. Whatever the reason, it's not working. And so I think that, taking snaps away from Wallace and giving it to another receiver to see who's working, I think is the priority. But I think also, it's not effective because Mike Wallace isn't doing very much. And I think that you take a look at some of these deep throws, and a lot of them I would blame on Teddy Bridgewater, but a lot of times, it does seem like Mike Wallace isn't tracking the deep ball very well. So I wouldn't say that is an effort problem. I think that he's pulling up when he should accelerate, or he's accelerating when he should pull up, and he's just not doing a very good job figuring out where the ball is going to be. A lot of times that'll look like an effort problem, but I think that's a skill problem. But we mentioned a couple of times on this podcast before that it looks like he's rounding out his routes. It looks like He's running routes to the wrong depth more and more often as the season goes on. And so, whether or not this is like a character flaw of Mike Wallace or whether or not he just doesn't have the ability to sustain the kind of attention to detail that you need to in this offense over the course of a full season, whatever it is, I think that he has gotten worse. And I think that his blocking actually doesn't speak super well for him. I remember in the preseason and at the beginning of the season, I was actually pretty impressed with how well he was blocking. But as the season goes on, I think that, his blocking hasn't been, something to note. He does have a negative blocking grade by Pro Football Focus, if that means anything to anybody. And just like, sort of the season has gone on, I think that his blocking grade has probably decreased just a tiny bit over time. So as a blocker, I think that, whether or not it's effort, I think that effort may play a role in it. But as a blocker, I think that there are some problems. I think that this piece does point out some good things. I think that sort of early season Mike Wallace was actually, pretty good. I think that, the week 1 San Francisco drop, that was actually a defensive pass interference that was uncalled by Antoine Bethea. I think that is a good point to make. I think that sort of, some of the problems with Bridgewater overthrowing Wallace early in the season, I think that those are good points to make. And maybe that turned Wallace off. Maybe that's just a facet of who he is. But I think that he's not a good receiver for the offense, either because of Teddy Bridgewater, because of the offense, or because Mike Wallace can't sustain a high level of play over the course of the season. So I'm surprised to see this piece, but it's an interesting enough take that I kind of wanted to have a counter take or a complimentary take, depending on what it would end up being.
A counter take, okay. And before we actually start with talking about the game, I just wanted to point out a great tweet that got sent to us after the game by
phenomenal tweet
by @Dustin Redding, who proceeded to eat his tickets from the Seahawks game.
That is so good.
Like that was great. That he had sent something earlier about why doesn't TCF Bank sell mini shots of like bleach for this type of blowout, but the eating of the ticket was phenomenal. So the three of us really enjoyed that and thought that was hilarious. We just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, no, it was really good.
So let's spend a couple of minutes. I'll even set a timer just to make sure we don't go over too much on the game. But let's just talk about it for a couple of minutes and let's do this as painlessly as possible. So we lost, and we lost badly. The one shining moment of the game for the Vikings was a Cordero Patterson run back for a touchdown in which he high-stepped the last 20 yards, which, okay, whatever. At least he completed the ball crossing the plane as opposed to dropping it at the 1. Like, good for him.
Right.
Good for him. But there were a couple of things to talk about. AP not getting a lot of touches. Teddy looking really rough. Our offensive line not holding, and a terrible call on Robison that he's still pissed off about. I think we should talk about the Robison thing first, because that was infuriating to say the
Sure.
least.
Yeah. I was pretty pissed about it at the time. Obviously, Robison was pissed about it. Obviously, for a couple of reasons. The first, I think, that is if you could turn those 7 points into 3 points, because I think they scored a touchdown on that drive. You can turn those 7 points into 3 points. I think the Vikings are in it more. I don't know if they would, be close enough to say that, they make it a close game, but they're in it more and they have, better play calling opportunities and whatnot. I think that's, something to take into account. But yeah, no, he should absolutely be pissed because the call itself was just a terrible call. They're putting an increased emphasis on, you don't want to say second tackling, but, of lifting up a player who's been tackled by the legs. But Russell Wilson was acting as if he wasn't down. The whistle was, I don't want to say late, but the whistle happened a little bit too late for Robison to react to it, to Wilson being down. And the alternative is to not know if a player is down, because a player, he doesn't have his knees on the ground, right? If he just has his hand on the ground, which, Robison from his angle, he can't tell. The alternative is to just give up, and then Wilson scores, and then it's your fault, right? Which, I mean, like, there's two bad things that happen there. Obviously, the touchdown is bad, but then also, that gets put on you because now you're suddenly a player who doesn't put in effort, right? which, that's kind of the exact opposite of who, Brian Robison is. So, yeah, no, I think, yeah, and he looked so, I don't want to say sad, but so, like, downtrodden as he was trying to explain to the ref, I didn't know he was down. There's no way I could have known he was down. And the ref, like, wasn't budging, and obviously he can't, like, take the call back after they had run a play after that, which I think that when they did that shot of Sin talking to the ref, they had already run a play. But, yeah, no, it was shitty, and I think the refs made the wrong call, and I think, a lot of the Seattle fans on my timeline kind of agreed. Either they agreed that it was just absolutely the wrong call, or they kind of agreed that was just too tough a situation for a player to be in.
Yeah, it just wasn't a good thing to be involved in. And the ref made what you could easily say it was a boneheaded call. It was not malicious at all. Clearly, the quarterback Russell Wilson was trying to get up and keep moving. You play until you hear the whistle, and he was just not given an opportunity to stop, really. So it was a terrible thing, but our tackling was atrocious on Sunday. Was just atrocious. And it was just funny because tackling has not been a problem this year for the Vikings.
Yeah, for large portions of the season, the Vikings were the best tackling team in the NFL. I'm sure that that's not quite true anymore, although I could, sort of run the numbers and post it to the show notes just to see if it's still true. It's weird because a combination of that and a lot of other things would have potentially made the game close enough for us to be able to legitimately talk about the reffing, because I think that, the officiating in the game was pretty bad, but it's also like it doesn't make sense to talk about it because the Vikings weren't close enough. They didn't play well enough for it to matter. And I think one big facet of that was the tackling, and you could take a look at a lot of the individual players. I think, the new linebacker, Jason Trusnick, who probably wouldn't have played if Edmund Robinson was active, but Trusnick backs up multiple positions, and I think Robinson only backs up, one position, so they made him inactive. Trusnick missed a lot of tackles. Anton Exum missed a lot of tackles. Robert Blanton technically did not seem to miss very many tackles, but he was dragged along for at least two of those rides, so he functionally missed a couple of tackles. And you even saw, some of the players that we're used to seeing as a good player, like Sharif Floyd. I think he missed two tackles. Daniel Hunter missed a tackle of Russell Wilson. So yeah, I think there was a lot of missed tackles in the game. A lot of it were backup players, and I think that explains a lot of it. It also kind of exposes the fact that the Vikings don't have phenomenal depth, although I don't know how much depth you can have and reasonably still be good if the best player at all three levels of your defense go down.
Yeah, that was just like the worst storm possible for that moment. It's like, oh, okay, well, here's the top three players for your defense, and they're not going to be playing. And like, what was it? Harrison Smith and Barr went out on the first series. So it's not like they could just keep going. Like, they were taken out right away. Like, okay, well,
right. You can game plan for it in the same way that they were attempting to game plan for like Linval Joseph being out.
Yeah, this wasn't a good idea. Bridgewater didn't look good. I think it's pretty clear that this was definitely his worst game as a Viking.
Yeah, I think so. And I haven't watched the All-22 yet. I've always changed my mind after watching it, but I would find it unlikely that I would change my opinion of Bridgewater's play in that game, because I think that just overall, I thought that he had a poor game. We talk about it a little bit more on the next podcast, so I'll leave it for that conversation. But I do think, this is a situation where you can kind of see the difference between an average quarterback and a good quarterback and a good quarterback and a great quarterback, because I think that, Bridgewater is for the season, a lot better than a lot of people think. But I think that this game kind of exposes the differences between the different qualities of quarterback and how, he's not developing sort of at the same rate that a lot of people would want. And so, this is a situation where, he didn't do as well under pressure. He was under pressure significantly more often. The offense also, didn't help him out. And I think this is how blowouts happen. It's a combination of, your primary player not playing well, and then a bunch of people exacerbating that by not putting that player in positions to sort of either recover or to make up for that kind of play. So Bridgewater was playing poorly, and then also Norv Turner didn't help by calling, a bunch of bad plays. They didn't take advantage of a significant, space underneath. They kept on throwing deep, and that's a temptation when you're behind is to be very aggressive when throwing the ball. And in that sense, maybe Adrian's a little bit correct about his gripes post game, is that the Vikings should have run the ball more in the first half, despite the fact that they were down 14-0 and then 21-0. Is that the Vikings, at least in the first half, should pay a little bit more attention to sort of what their plan is, and be a lot less aggressive, because aggression is sometimes it's the right thing because you want to be high risk, high reward when you're late, but you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you cannot possibly win. And so I think that Norv Turner did some poor work. I think that the offensive line was a big problem. I thought Brandon Fusco obviously was a huge problem. Matt Khalil had his worst game I think all season, and TJ Clemmings was really bad. So I think it's a combination of all of these things that come together, which is how the offense did so poorly.
Yeah, it was just weird to watch just every facet of the game break down so poorly. Like, it's just not something where as a Vikings fan, you're used to seeing it at some time, but we just weren't used to seeing it all happen at once in a game like this. So
sure, and it's definitely not something that we've gotten used to this season.
No, definitely not. We've been fairly consistent, at least in how we play on offense and how we play on defense. We might not be the best team in the league at times, but we can still defend the run. We can still run. We can still do dump passes. We can still have Kyle Rudolph be available. We can still have Mike Wallace drop a pass. We can still have facets of our game that are available. But it just wasn't working. Anything else we want to just touch on before we go into the mailbag?
I think we covered most of it. When I look at the All-22, I'll take a look to see when receivers are getting open. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a miscommunication in terms of when routes should break and when Teddy's at the top of his drop, if receivers are running the wrong routes. I wouldn't be surprised if that happened too. But I think we covered everything. A bunch of bad players were bad, a bunch of good players were not good enough, and a bunch of the offense sucked.
Just plain and simple. One last thing I want to talk about, and I don't think it's mentioned in the mailbags. I'm just bringing it up now. It seemed like we had the same thing happen here that happened against Green Bay, in that instead of attempting to contain, we really went for the sack. And when we ended up going for the sack on Russell Wilson, he ended up making plays with his feet and causing us to be in a bad position, and ended up doing really well at it. I guess my question is, when we are facing somebody who is a mobile quarterback, is it wise to be going after the sack? Could we go for something a little, I want to say a little less, but could we go for something maybe in the way of containment as opposed to going for blood?
I think containment is a solid strategy if you've got a quarterback who is one-dimensional and is singularly good at running. But I think that's the issue that people keep on wanting to push with these mobile quarterbacks, is that they create these cascading problems for defenses if they're good in the pocket and if they're good sort of on the run. And we saw what happened in the last 2 weeks before this game, what happens when Russell Wilson's contained in the pocket. I mean, against the Steelers, he nearly threw for a perfect passer rating. It was a passer rating over 150. And 5 touchdowns, 124 yards. The week before, he was very good. Didn't have as much volume, so you couldn't get the kind of passer rating that pops off the screen in the same way. But I think it was 120 plus or something like that. He's thrown 10 touchdowns and no interceptions over the past couple of games. So, and in those 2 games, they kept him in the pocket. He didn't run all that much, and they didn't force him to scramble or anything. And so it's difficult for you as a defensive coordinator to see those 2 games, see the Seahawks put together this amazing offensive drive driven by the passing game much more than the running game, and say, hey, don't rush them, right? So in this case, I think that the key is when you go in for the sack is that you stay disciplined within your rush lanes and you don't create new gaps. And I think that that's very, very difficult, obviously, but it's kind of the only solution. And to some extent, the Vikings did actually do that a little bit. And I think the only instances where they truly lost contain is actually with Danielle Hunter on the field. So I think Everson Griffin and Brian Robison both did a very good job balancing out their defensive responsibilities when they were, playing defensive end. But then you kicked Everson Griffin inside. He got blown up on the run. And then in cases, Everson Griffin also did have some problems on the outside against the run. But they were able to stay generally disciplined. But then you have to put out Daniil Hunter. He had 30 snaps, right? He had 35 snaps. You have to put out Scott Crichton, and because of that, your containment ability does decrease a little bit. So I think that's something that is the issue more than it was, responsibility, because you have to ask them to rush the quarterback, to put pressure on the quarterback, but you also have to be sort of wary about what happens when the quarterback gets out the pocket. And that's the fundamental reason that people want mobile quarterbacks. It's not because, they're good at another thing. It's that it puts a lot of problems into focus and sort of capitalizes on them, because it creates sort of exaggerated problems in pass defense and in run defense.
It seemed strange that we made the same mistake against Aaron Rodgers that we made against Russell Wilson, and it had the exact same result. Oh, hey, he was able to get out of the way, we weren't able to get the sack, and he was able to make a huge play downfield. Crap. So let's start with the mailbag, and let's start with this very good first question from Tommy Gunn, who asks, so how does one best forget what happened on Sunday while still maintaining a job as well as a reasonably healthy liver?
Well, okay, so that's like 3 requirements, right? Forgetting what happened on Sunday, maintaining employment status, and maintaining healthy liver. And I think that at best you can solve 2 of those 3 problems.
The concussion movie just came out. I feel like we could learn something from the concussion movie, like how best to give yourself a temporary concussion.
Actually, no, that does fulfill all 3. You move from healthy liver to unhealthy brain, but you got to make sacrifices.
Yeah.
For me, the best answer was probably weed. It depends.
Is that what this has come to?
It depends on sort of what your job tests for and how often they test. But, people can perform reasonably well at their jobs while they're high, depending on what their job is. It doesn't really have much of an impact on your liver. And it can cause you to forget things, although usually while you're high, not sort of after the thing happened. But, the best you can, right? So that might be a solution. I don't know, maybe acid.
Maybe getting tackled by J.J. Watt is the best answer for this. Just, get yourself nice and knocked out. They talked about Hearns, the receiver for Jacksonville, who just got cleared and released and everything for the concussion protocol, and he doesn't remember the hit, but he does.
That's awful and scary. But
terribly. But massive head trauma.
Tackled by J.J. Watt at your job, because I think. A lot of people, depending on who their employer is, a lot of people will lose their job if they just can't show up for a while, right? That makes sense. But if you're tackled at your job, maybe you can file for workers' comp.
Actually, I feel
like you could sue J.J. Watt.
I feel like that's a good idea anyway. But what about... Because what about the guy who was... Do you remember the Super Bowl commercial a few years ago where they had Terry Tate, the office linebacker?
Yeah.
Maybe they hired an office linebacker. He just wants to make sure that you turn
almost
the coffee
certainly
pot.
You could file for workers' comp. Although, the increased productivity that you get from an office linebacker might be worth all the workers' comp claims you have to pay as a company. So, yeah, no, totally.
Yeah, I think that could work. So let's just go with the PTSD and the brain injury and call it good. Let's get into the game and talk about a question here from M. Canfield, who asks, I've been pissed with Norv for a while now. Should I be?
I think so. I think that, it's tough because I think that as fans, and I'm including myself in that statement, we're much more caught up in, I don't want to say the extremes, but reasons to be one-dimensional about our opinion of somebody. So reasons to be mad at Norv, or reasons to be mad at Musgrave, and reasons to be happy with Mike Zimmer, reasons to be happy with George Edwards, when obviously it's a lot more complicated than that. I think that Norv Turner is a big problem, and I think that he's one of the big problems for the offense, and I think that you take a look, it's been a while since he's run a good offense. It's not necessarily his fault. He's had, Matt Castle and Christian Ponder and the entire Cleveland quarterbacking crew, and that you kind of want to give him a little bit of a pass for, fine. But you know, on the other side of it, I think and the 2012 San Diego Chargers, they were not good. And I think that Norv Turner was a big part of that. And I think that you want to take a look at what's happening in these games. And I think that Norv Turner continues to call the games in the incorrect way. And of course, we don't really know what goes into everything. And it's not like, the kind of the, now we've been sarcastically saying you don't know the call every time someone, criticizes an offensive lineman, because it's pretty obvious when an offensive lineman does poorly. But we don't know everything that goes into a lot of the game planning stuff, and we kind of gloss over all of the positives that you get from an offensive coordinator or from an offense or even from like a quarterback. Like the things that they're good at, we tend to wash over. And I think the best example of this was with Bill Musgrave. I think it was very easy to criticize him, and it was correct, to be upset with him and criticize him. But we were willing to put away some of the things that he does well, which is that he's very good at play design. And he does do a good job of finding areas where players with unique talents can excel. And Percy Harvin is a pretty good example of that. In Norv Turner, I think that his system is very teachable. It's very the system itself is pretty adaptable. He doesn't seem to be, but it's something that that the players can buy into pretty early and learn. And even though the offense itself, Greg Jennings mentioned this a couple of times before he got cut. The offense itself is obviously it's pretty complex because of the option routes, but being able to teach the basic system is something that's pretty easy to do, and that was very difficult to do with Bill Musgrave. It's very, very difficult to do with an Erhard Perkins offense that you have, in New England. And so you can add layers of complexity to it that make it difficult to get on the field, but you can get players, up to speed with the language pretty early, and that's a good thing. And I think that it's an offense that knows what it needs and knows what it wants, and that's pretty good. Sometimes offenses you design and you don't really know who to target in the draft or what you want in free agency and stuff like that. And so that's a good thing too, because it kind of simplifies your needs list. But, I think that Norv Turner is the problem, and I think that we should be pissed with him because I think that, he continues to call 7-step drops, even instances where a 5-step drop with 2 hitches or something like that require that Teddy just stay in the pocket for a long time while a mediocre offensive line tries to give him that time. And I think that we saw what happens when Norv Turner adapts, right? And we've already talked about it, and we're going to talk about it on the next show too. What happens when you give Teddy a shorter passing game? That was the last 5 weeks of last year, and he did extremely well. And they're just not moving that into this year because I think a lot of offensive coordinators think, I've got a running game, so I'm going to switch to a play action game, and that means a deep passing game. So I've got a good running game, which means a deep passing game, and that makes no sense. And I think a lot of offensive coordinators have moved away from that, where you can combine a good running game with a short passing game. When the Eagles' offense is good, that's what you see a lot of, right? And so it's certainly possible to move away from the things that we're used to seeing, and I think that Norv Turner's not doing it. So yeah, you should be pissed with Norv, but kind of understand that there are some positives to what he does.
He's not the worst play caller we've had in 3 seasons.
That's true.
Let us be clear. That is a possibility. So let's go on to our next question from Thomas Addison, who says, lack of development on the offensive line or wide receiver, both on coaches from previous regime. Davidson and Patterson, why not on the hot seat?
No, that's a good question. I would think that Davidson is going to get a little bit of a pass for all the injuries that have occurred on the offensive line the last 2 years. And Mike Harris, I think, is a really great example of a player who has developed under his regime. So that, I think, is a good question. But, you can... And then also Matt Khalil, Jeff Davidson may take some credit for the recovery of Matt Khalil, and you could say, oh, hey, he was bad because of injuries. That's a more interesting and nuanced question. Davidson brought in an outside consultant to get Matt Khalil better. So, you don't want to give him too much credit, but he did at least find some help. I don't know, man. But Davidson was also the guy who engineered the run game behind 2012 Adrian Peterson. He's the guy that's engineering the successful run game right now. So I can see why he's getting a pass. Patterson is Patterson is actually the defensive line coach. So that's the wide receiver coach is George Stewart. Unless you mean Cordero Patterson, in which case it's not like a parallel sentence because you've got Davidson the coach and then Patterson the receiver. Anyway. The receiver coach George Stewart from the previous regime He kind of gets so first players give him rave reviews, coaches give him rave reviews. He's kind of, I don't want to say a legend in the coaching community, but he's very well regarded in the coaching community, kind of like, Coach Davidson. Coach Davidson actually has gotten offers, had gotten offers from multiple teams last year. I think that, the Raiders wanted him as their offensive line coach. The Falcons did before they hired the guy they hired, and New England did after Dante Scarnecchia resigned. And that's like huge, right? Dante Scarnecchia, one of the best offensive line coaches in history, right? Like behind Howard Mudd, right? Those are big shoes to fill. And New England decided that Jeff Davidson, might be the guy to do it. So he's extremely well regarded. The same thing is true of George Stewart. Maybe not as well regarded as Jeff Davidson, but George Stewart is credited for the development of Roddy White, and I think that that's kind of fair. A lot of people are like, "Oh, Roddy White, first round pick. He's really good. You don't get credit for a really good player staying really good." But it's kind of weird because coaches get a lot of credit for players doing poorly, but they don't get a lot of credit for when players do well because that player was already supposed to be good, and I think that's kind of stupid. Roddy White is transformed. He was a raw receiver coming out of college, and now he's one of the more technically refined receivers in the game. He's too slow now to be, a good player, but I think that I think it was 2012 and 2013. It was one of those two or both of those years. He was having extremely good seasons, and they were defined by sort of his precision. And he wasn't that receiver coming out of college. And I think that you could give, George Stewart a lot of the credit for that. And a lot of people will also point to T.O., and that's kind of the case where do you want to credit the coach for developing him, or do you want to talk about you don't get credit for good players already being good? And I think that's maybe a better example of that. But T.O. gives a lot of credit to George Stewart, and who knows, right? Players seem to think that he's a great coach, and I think that that's maybe one of the reasons. I think that there is a reason to be critical of George Stewart though, because he was there with Percy Harvin. Maybe you could say Sidney Rice was good under him and good under no one else. Maybe a lot of people will say it's Brett Favre, and I think that's reasonable. But then you take a look at the receivers that the Vikings have had over the past however many years, and they've all been mediocre to bad. That's a problem. On the other hand, what about Stephon Diggs? So I think that neither of them are on the hot seat because of recent successes and also because of how well regarded they are in the league.
Yeah, it's definitely something where it'd be nice if it. And you're not going to get somebody to get both sides of how well a player develops. You're always going to end up getting the blame. You're not going to end up getting the successes out of it. You had mentioned Terrell Owens. Solve an argument I had on Twitter this week. Terrell Owens.
You're probably right.
Hall of Famer. Yes or no?
Yeah. Well, did you take the other side of this argument?
No, I was saying he's a Hall of Famer. I was actually basing his whole Hall of Fame candidacy on his play in the Super Bowl, where he magically came back from injury. I don't know if PEDs were involved or what. I hate that we have to add that as a caveat, but dude played out of his mind and was easily the best player on that field that day. And the only reason why they lost is because both Donovan McNabb and Andy Reid forgot that, how time works.
The classic Andy Reid story. Also pretty classic Donovan McNabb. But yeah.
Donovan McNabb not knowing how the game works, that things can end in ties and stuff, and, how time works, or, just, no. Terrell Owens, Hall of Famer. Maybe not first ballot, but definitely a Hall of Famer. You can't...
Yeah, no, for sure. So Terrell Owens has been an All-Pro for 3 different teams, led the league in touchdowns in 3 separate years, 4, I think separate quarterbacks, if I'm remembering correctly. He played on some bad teams and put up some decent numbers. I think that getting 800 yards with the 2009 Bills is an accomplishment. And the quarterbacks he's had, Jeff Garcia in San Francisco, right? And to make an All-Pro when Jeff Garcia is your quarterback, I think Garcia had some really, really good years, but I think that, Owens was maybe, a bigger reason for that. I don't know where he lists in sort of all-time receiving yards things, but I think he's top 5. And he was probably one of the better options in NFL history at getting a first down when you needed a first down. But I don't know why he's not a Hall of Famer.
Probably
what's the argument against it?
People who I would imagine people who were the argument was that he didn't play for enough, or didn't end up winning a ring, and didn't end up putting up numbers that would be consistent with some of the Hall of Famers.
We're counting wide receiver rings now. That's ridiculous.
I stopped paying attention. My New Year's resolution this year was to not argue on the internet, and I've done fairly well on that, but. And I'm not exactly the biggest Terrell Owens fan or anything. Like, I don't have fat heads in my
he's
like
an
home or something.
Annoying person, and I don't like him.
Yeah,
still.
I mean, maybe he belongs in the Hall of Fame purely because of his Pro versus Joe's days, and that he was reaching out and extending the leagues, whatever. But no, like as soon as somebody had mentioned like rings, I was like, okay, I need to not listen to you anymore. Like we're done here. We're clearly done. Let's move on to the next question from Justin Rubin, who asks, are there any offensive concepts that can combine power running and spread passing? Example, utilizing both AD and Teddy's skills.
So that's actually why the pistol was invented. So a lot of people are calling for the pistol, and they're like, hey, we should run more pistol sets. So there's a couple of things here. First, you sometimes you want to dismiss it as fans being fans. Like, well, I mean, you can't just change an offense, or that's just a gimmick, or you can't just do X thing. In this case, fans are not just being fans. I think the pistol is the right solution. But that is exactly why the pistol was invented, so that you could combine power running schemes, like, man blocking schemes, with, not just shotgun passing and spread looks, but also, with the option, because, the option initially was a power running thing, but for most of how we understand the option, it's zone running, which is why you call it the zone read. And so for the option's recent life in college for the past 10, 15 years has been run, with zone running, but the pistol is designed to get a running back moving downhill while you still get a lot of the benefits of shotgun passing. The interesting thing is the Vikings are running a lot of plays out of pistol depth, even though they're not running necessarily the pistol formation all that often. And, sometimes they do. Sometimes Adrian Peterson is 7 yards back and Teddy is 4 yards back. But Teddy, when he's in shotgun, is actually often at pistol depth. He's often at 4.5 yards. And so instead of at shotgun depth. So, I think, that is the offense. There's not like a ton of sophistication they need to add to that answer, because all the sophistication is in the words pistol offense. Yeah, that utilizes both, and the Vikings have not been as aggressive about using the pistol set as they should have been the past 3 or 4 years when they really, really could have done that. Beyond that, I think, what they did under Musgrave actually did do a pretty decent job of incorporating some stuff. I think that, and again, this is kind of the thing where people don't want to give credit to Musgrave for the good things that he does. I think that the wishbone, or the reverse wishbone / the inverted diamond, or whatever you want to call it, that stuff looks like power running. And if you have a tight end on the line, it's definitely not spread concept stuff. But it could definitely be, a spread style look, because, Colin Kaepernick, when he was good, did it out of pistol, where you had sort of an inverted wishbone / diamond / full backfield, or full house, I think is what it's called on Madden. He operated that out of the pistol set. You had 2 wide receivers wide, and then you had the 2 people that were next to you, a tight end and a fullback, run routes with the halfback running routes too, in situations that looked a lot like spread passing concepts. So I think that there's a lot of passing concepts that utilize both of those strengths, and I think the Vikings are not using them.
Next question is from Thomas Addison, who asks, why the continued commitment to Clemmings?
Yeah, I think part of it, and I think people bring up Austin Shepard all the time, and Searle's the guy they traded for from San Diego, who they would desperately want to have back, by the way. I think that part of the reason has to do with developing him. He's a long-term asset. They maybe see him as the right tackle of the future after Phil Lodehold's gone. And, maybe that could be sooner rather than later, because, Achilles injury is not super easy to come back from. But I think that that's part of it. And I think that they see kind of maybe more upside with him. But I I think that Austin Shepard right now is a better right tackle. I think that they should play Austin Shepard because I think that it protects Teddy's assets a little bit more, which is a healthy body. And I think that, yeah, I agree with the mailbag question again. I think that TJ Clemmings is a mistake to play right now, but I think that they see the value of live reps as being pretty huge. And I agree that, Clemmings is probably going to, improve massively this offseason, in part because of everything that he saw in the NFL, because he developed a lot at Pitt over the course of his 2 years at offensive tackle. And so I do think that he's going to improve a lot, but I think that they're going about it the wrong way.
Do you feel like
I'm just going to say that?
Do you feel like they feel like they're pot committed at this point? Like we've played enough games with him at this point that we want to finish out the season with him because he has the most experience of any potential person out there. He's had the most reps this year.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's like a sunk cost thing, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was a big part of it. Like the stuff that he's learned is stuff that Austin Shepard. A lot of the stuff that he's learned is stuff that Austin Shepard hasn't learned yet. And even though Austin Shepard is probably about a right tackle, they do see Shepard as more of a guard, and I don't know if that's a reason. But there's just some stuff you learn live in NFL games that even if you're like a right tackle for Alabama, or a left tackle, I think he was actually a left tackle for Alabama at one point. Even if you're a tackle for Alabama, just because you're not playing in the NFL. With NFL coordinators and NFL offenses against NFL defenses, I think there's stuff that you see, that advantages you. I don't think that outweighs, what the things that Austin Shepard is better at. I think that even if you take that into account, Austin Shepard should be the tackle. But I think that might be part of the reasoning too. I think that he's got the most experience. I think that maybe there's a sunk cost thing, and I think that they really see sort of this huge, developmental edge to him. And he is kind of playing better than he did at the beginning of the season, so there's that.
He couldn't play much worse than he did in the first couple of games, I suppose. Let's go to Matt Nelson, who says, I know Arif has touched on this before, but can he please explain the left guard and right guard responsibilities? And is there anything to explain the Fusco troubles, not including injury?
I wouldn't be surprised if injury is the primary reason, so sorry to disappoint you. I think that's probably the biggest reason. But, some of it is just footwork. Fusco, kind of dismissed it because he said he played left guard a little bit at Slippery Rock. But the thing is, he actually did not play that much left guard at Slippery Rock. He's played center and right guard, in right tackle, almost all of his life, going all the way back to high school. He's a high school right tackle. So he's very, very little experience playing left-sided footwork. And I think that's a big part of it. So I think that's not necessarily that responsibilities are different so much as the footwork is different. And I think that it takes, some time to get used to it. I talked to some people pretty close to Fusco. It was, sort of not for attribution / it wasn't for, a story. I wasn't able to write about it. But I do know that Fusco wasn't super happy necessarily about the switch, from right guard to left guard. But he'd gotten over it by the time camp started, so it's not like that's this huge story or anything like that. But I think that that's part of it because he knows that he has to adapt. Yeah, because he was really good at right guard, and he has to adapt his game to left guard. Just because the Vikings think that Matt Khalil needs more help. Turns out Matt Khalil did not need more help. He's actually playing pretty well, and the offensive line is now worse than it ever has been with Charlie Johnson at left guard. So. That happens, and there are some differences between left guard and right guard responsibilities. That it's fading away in the NFL now because it used to be such that the right side of the line was the strong side of the line, and so you'd have strong guards and quick guards. You see this at West Virginia a lot, where you have somebody assigned as a quick guard and somebody assigned as the strong guard, and that's because the quick guard is much more likely to pull. And play as the pulling guard on power runs. Sometimes on screen passes, this guard is much more likely to leave and use their quicker footwork. That's why it's called a quick guard. Quicker footwork to maneuver around. They need to be a little bit more maneuverable. That's not really who Fusco is. Charlie Johnson very often was the pulling guard. Fusco very rarely was when they were both on the line together. But I think that that's less of a thing this season, although, Fusco is pulling and he's not pulling necessarily all that well. So, that's something to take into account, but the responsibilities are not that much different at this point. Although, I will say, Mike Harris is much more likely to get help from TJ Clemmings, not because, Clemmings is great or anything like that, or that Mike Harris is bad, but actually for the opposite reason, because they'll have a tight end one-on-one against a pass rusher, and then Clemmings down blocks a tackle, and that's going to help Mike Harris a little bit.
Here's a fun little question from Sean Smith, who asks, let's play Would You Rather. Would you rather remove end-arounds and rollouts after a big game, or actually throw on 1st and 10 before it's too late?
Definitely the second. I think end arounds and rollouts after a big gain are kind of frustrating, but making sure Teddy doesn't get hit is good.
That's. I think I think we've built a podcast around the idea of keeping Teddy alive. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think that people are kind of reacting too much to, oh, you've had a big gain, now don't screw it up with a gimmick or whatever. Like, yeah, I get it, but that doesn't bother me that much. Throwing on 1st and 10 before it's too late would be great. I totally agree. I think that running on 1st and 10 has been a staple of an offense for 40 years. And I mean, people know 1st and 10 as a running down. I mean, if you take a look at, defensive playbooks, even the relatively recent ones, I was reading Nick Saban's 2010 defensive playbook. And at the very beginning, it says, we will stop the run on 1st and 10. We will stop the pass on 3rd and long. It just, throughout the playbook, it assumes that on 1st and 10, you're going to run the ball. And Bill Walsh figured this out 30-some years ago, right? Even 40 years ago, if you want to go back to the Ken Anderson days, that throwing on 1st and 10 is super advantageous because everyone expects a run. And he would build, I want to say build a game plan around this, but he would build a game plan knowing this and take advantage of it. And there are coordinators now, both on the defensive and offensive side of the ball, that haven't really caught up to 1984 Bill Walsh. And it's frustrating. So I don't want to get rid of the fact that the Vikings run the majority of the time on 1st and 10, but I would like to see more passes.
Yeah, we can run on 2nd and 10. We'll be good. Let's go with M. Canfield with a question. Does this game have the same effect as the Niners game, like a kick in the rear? Was it better to get blown out by the Seahawks?
That's an interesting question. I'm not very good at speaking to player psychology. The things that I compete in are not necessarily physical. When I was a football player, it was definitely worse to get blown out because I had bad morale. But that's kind of who I am. I didn't have the psychology of an NFL player, even if I was going to be as physically talented as one, which clearly that wasn't going to happen.
Arif didn't want it enough. That's simple. Arif just didn't want it enough.
Yeah, kind of true. But I was an intensely competitive person, and when I was competing, and I think most people who listen to this podcast know it was in debate. Which actually, if you add up the math, it actually takes up more time out of college than being a football player does. Which I think is a problem with the football system more than it is a reason to brag about debate.
No, I think listeners
20 hours a week. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I think listeners would not be surprised to know that all three of us were in competitive debate at some point for several years. I believe all three of us did at least all four years of high school.
Yeah, all 4 years of high school, and then I did 5 years in college because they let you. And
I like to think like to think they made you redshirt the first year just for fun.
But yeah, and when I got blown out of a round, when I got destroyed in a debate, when I knew going into halfway through the debate, when I knew going into sort of the halfway point that there was no way that we would win, I would do creative shit and put us unreasonably close to winning. But still, it's demoralizing. And if you come out of a round thinking that you had no chance to win, I think it is a lot less. I think it's a lot less motivating than being in a close loss against a good team, which I've also been sort of in that situation. It kind of makes me want to work more actually when I'm in a close loss, but. A physical activity might be a lot different. Football is significantly different than most of the activities anyone ever competes in. And so it could be a little bit different. Maybe it's a wake-up thing like the Niners game kind of was. I I think psychologically it may not have as much of an impact as a lot of people like to think. And I know a lot of people who play football disagree with me, and that's notable. But I do think that people are willing to over-attribute, things, even including their own work and their own effort, to psychological factors more than anything else. I don't think it was better to get blown out, and I think that it could have a more detrimental impact on the player's confidence than it is going to be a wake-up thing. Who knows? Maybe I could be wrong. But I would think that the players would. I don't want to say the players would rather be competitive. Obviously, they would. But I think that from a motivation perspective, I think it's better to be competitive.
So let's go to the next question, which is from @CallMeKelso, who asks the very simple question: is Exum good? I can't tell.
That is a great question, and if Exum hadn't been injured for the rest of the season, I would do more breaking down his film against the Seahawks, and obviously take a second look at what he did, against Atlanta? Question mark. Whatever. I think maybe he's not. You have to tackle, and it wasn't that he just missed tackles. I think that he consistently missed tackles with poor form, and I think that that's the reason he kept off the field despite Sendeo and Blanton being ahead of him on the depth chart. Because if you can't consistently show good form when tackling, he would aim at the wrong hip. I noticed that a couple of times on his missed tackles, and he would be he would take some poor angles at times. And of course on that Tevin Coleman run, so it was Atlanta on that Tevin Coleman run that Anthony Barr caused the fumble, and he did take a pretty reasonably good angle. And then he didn't do anything with it. I'm glad he slowed down Tevin Coleman enough for Anthony Barr to get to him. But it still felt like he didn't do much with it. I had mixed feelings with his performance on that run. I think for now he's probably not good. I think an okay game plus a bad game is pretty soft evidence, but reasonable evidence to say, probably not good.
Yeah. It'd be, again, and as you said, it'd be different if he wasn't out for the rest of the year. That could easily be an interesting article of just the question of, is Exum good? But unfortunately, he's out for the rest of the year. Just too bad. So let's go with the next question from Brad Tucker, who asks, how does Minnesota compare to other offenses in variety of formations or packages and snap counts for skill players? That's a good one.
Yeah, so the Minnesota's had 106. So I didn't actually do any research as a result of this question, and I should have. Would have been nice. I was doing research for something else when I came upon this. So Minnesota's had 116 different unique lineups this year over the course of, and this doesn't include the most recent game against Seattle, over the course of 665 plays. And I took out all of the Sean Hill snaps because that would multiply things unreasonably. And that is a lot less than some teams. I think. New England may be the best example of a team that has a bunch of different personnel packages, but New England's not going to be a great example to look to because of all the injuries that they've had this year. That is still less than most teams, and I think it's because of the high volume that we see Adrian Peterson getting, the high percentage of snaps that we see Mike Wallace getting, and so forth. And so it's difficult to say, hey, you should have more unique lineups. There's 4 lineups that the Vikings run more than any other lineup. And so that's Teddy, the normal offensive line, and then you have Kyle Rudolph there, and then the receivers that change were at the beginning of the year it was Charles Johnson, later on it was Mike Wallace, and then you'd switch out Rhett Ellison for Stephon Diggs at times, so you'd have a 3 receiver set versus a 2 receiver set, and Adrian Peterson. And then sometimes you would have, instead of Stephon Diggs, it'd be Jarius Wright, and then once instead of Adrian Peterson, it was Matt Asiata. So those are the 4 most often lineups that the Vikings run, and those are all of them except for the first one is a 3 receiver set, the first one is a 2 receiver set, and that's just what the Vikings happen to run most often. I think that they do have fewer unique lineups than most of the NFL. I don't know if that's necessarily a problem. You'd have to control for injury and stuff like that, and I didn't take the time to do anything like that. I just kind of wanted to look at how good the offense was with or without certain receivers or certain players.
Looking at comparing that to the Patriots is kind of crazy considering how many terrible injuries they've had this year. They probably have the most combinations, probably have the most people missing from their crappy offensive line, and
Yeah, they've had like 12 different offensive line combinations or something like that.
Like people talk about Cam Newton throwing to nobody. Who the hell are the receivers for the Patriots this year?
I think one of the receivers they cut earlier in the year. So yeah,
be like Cordell Patterson could easily be like a number 1 or a number 2 guy over there. It's just insane. Just wrong. So next question. Oh, this is a good one. This is about the fantasy league, actually. Let's talk about the fantasy league. Christopher Wiley asks, were Santos and Janikowski started in the fantasy league this week? As many of you know, we have the Norse Code Fantasy League, where it is negative 25 points if you miss an extra point. And there were a lot of extra points missed this week. The kickers who were actually picked up this week that did miss were Nick Novak, Sebastian Janikowski, Santos, and Graham Gano. Graham Gano being picked up by me, so suck it, Graham Gano. And that was it for this week. But this has been an interesting experiment in watching teams go down. Because in many cases, this has ruined entire weeks for people. We may end up having to revisit this rule. I think it's wonderful, but it is causing a lot of anger. Like we're about to start the playoffs in the fantasy league, and it's not great because you just know that there's a real possibility that your whole season could go down in flames because your extra point is missed by your kicker.
Yeah, and not to go all in on fantasy talk for Norse Code. I started out the season undefeated, and then promptly went 1-7 after my kicker missed an extra point. And so I'm going to blame him for the negative momentum that my team has had since then. Because that's just brutal. Thanks, Brandon McManus.
Hey, I had 2 straight weeks of Randy Bullock missing extra points.
Oh God!
I think it's entirely possible I have the most missed extra points for this league. It's just ridiculous. Which is funny. I have I don't know what it is this year. I'm in 4 leagues and I am in 11th and 12th in 2 leagues. One of which I didn't care about, so it doesn't matter. But I'm in 11th and 12th in 2 leagues. I'm in first place and in second in a different league. I'm in first place because I started Ryan Fitzpatrick over Phillip Rivers. That is not behavior that should be rewarded. That is
that's hilarious.
This is not okay.
Oh, and I just realized it was actually not Brandon McManus who missed the kick for me. It was the 1 week that Brandon McManus was on bye, so I started Chandler Catanzaro. That's the week that he missed the only extra point that he's missed all year. So thanks, dude.
Tommy Gunn asks, say the Supreme Court gets involved and declares fantasy illegal and real sports illegal by extension. What does Arif do next?
Real sports are illegal? Like all sports?
Actually, the show Real Sports on HBO ends up becoming
illegal. Okay, that makes sense.
Actually, I already know the answer to this, but what do you think you would do if this were the case?
The same thing I do with actual gambling, which is just to play DFS on an offshore website.
See, I think what you would actually do if real sports were made illegal is you would pack up your things and you would go out to solve the question as to whether or not Stevie Wonder is actually blind.
That's true. Me and my intrepid self would go out and solve this question.
You would just devote I can't wait for the 10,000 word piece on the trutherism of whether or not Stevie Wonder is actually blind. I can't wait for this. You're just going to sit in a room with him and just throw stuff at him, aren't you?
Oh yeah, from all possible angles for years.
And he'll never know it's you. Next question is from Tommy Gunn again, who asks, would you rather have your grandmother's first name or her hair?
I'm okay with a shaved head, so I guess her hair, because I can just get rid of it. But if I have to have her hair, my maternal grandmother still has all her hair. It's gray, but I think I would work with that. Her name is ethnic, and therefore you cannot determine whether or not it is a male gendered name or a female gendered name or a neutral name. So that's not bad either.
it's one of those white people problems. Like they're just not going to look into whether or not it's a male or female name. They'll just assume it's male.
Right.
Yeah, mine's.
Right. Fine.
I think I would. I think I could rock the Olga. I think I could be an Olga. I don't know about the hair, but I think I could. I think I could be an Olga. That. No, actually, scratch that. I could never be an Olga. Olga. The thing is, like, Olga is white people like ethnic in that it's just known that that's a female name. Like, it just wouldn't end up working. As opposed to yours, like, oh, okay, that could be a male or a female. We're just not going to look into it. We're lazy. This is. Are we going to get back into a discussion on white privilege again? Is that where this is leading?
You know, this is definitely an example of anti-white privilege. You're just gonna have to deal with it. That you can't have your grandmother's name. I'm sorry, dude.
This is this is crap. This is just crap. All right, Luke Larson asks, "What is the best complete fast food burger joint?"
Oh man, this would have been pretty good for Dusty. Although maybe he never goes to fast food.
Yeah, I just imagine Dusty going, "Well, if it doesn't have truffles, then I'm just not going."
Yeah, that's very.
I prefer my burger joint to have Korean barbecue.
So I don't know. So I don't know what defines complete, because if you mean comprehensive, then obviously it's Jack in the Box because they serve the most kinds of food. But obviously that's not the answer. Maybe it's complete as in every part of the meal that you order is going to be good. So that actually rules out In-N-Out for me. As much as I love In-N-Out, I think that their fries are singularly bad. So that's a problem. I think maybe Whataburger is pretty holistically good. So I would put them up there. Five Guys is pretty good. They do limit your options a lot. It's just like you can only get a burger or whatever. So I definitely put them up there. So I guess the narrower range that fast food companies produce, the higher likelihood you're going to get a better complete experience. Otherwise, I mean, I don't hate McDonald's, man. Their fries are way better than Burger King fries.
Yeah, their fries are better than Burger King fries. I think that Wendy's fries are still better than those two, though.
Man, I have had some up and down experiences at Wendy's, so I don't know.
Wendy's is a bit of a crapshoot, but
I mean, I love their like spicy chicken sandwich or whatever. But I mean, you can only kind of get the fries if you got like the baked potato. You're disappointed. Their chili is awful. I think some of the other sandwiches sometimes have problems. Who knows?
Five Guys is, I think Five Guys on the whole is really good. The Cajun fries are amazing. You're definitely getting more fries than you can handle as a human being.
It's awesome.
Whenever you end up getting that, even at my fattest, I still kind of looked at the bag of fries like, all right, challenge accepted. And then you hear like the Ryu theme from Street Fighter. Like, all right, we're gonna do this. Let's buckle down. We got it. We're just gonna eat these until it's just cold starch. But like, I'm gonna throw a different name out there. I'm gonna go with Sonic. Sonic,
oh my god, they crossed my mind and I didn't say it, but
Sonic,
I think that you're right. Sonic deserves to be in the conversation.
Consistently good across nearly every aspect. It's crazy how many good things there are at Sonic. Yeah. So I would go
wide
Five Guys,
variety of good sandwiches, a wide variety of good drinks. I think they have shakes. I think, and they're pretty good. And I think the fries are pretty good.
Sure.
So yeah. They're only like they're still attached to this like 1950s like we bring the order out to you if you're in your car or whatever, or you have to eat outside. So that kind of annoys me, but I think the food is very good.
Yeah, well, nobody's talking about the experience of ordering and eating, more of just the quality of the food. And if that's the case, then Sonic all the way. Sonic is fantastic. Here's a good one, and I have a pretty good answer for it, I think. Natalie asks, is there a more pleasant smell than the fresh-baked chocolate chip cookies? If so, what? Hashtag anything but this game.
Yeah, so, I mean, a lot of these questions were tweeted at us during the Seahawks-Vikings blowout.
But during the third quarter, I had pretty much decided we were doing an all mailbag, and this was not going to be a real recap episode.
Right. Natalie, that's a good question. At the risk of getting like a dirty answer, which I'm not going to provide. I don't know what James is going to do. I would say that the fresh baked cinnamon rolls smell better, but I actually like fresh baked chocolate chip cookies more.
I'm going to go with something near and dear to Arif's heart, actually. I think that the best smell is when you come home and the crock pot is on.
Oh, yeah. That's great. That's one of the best smells of all.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. The other day I was upstairs working on something, and all of a sudden I smelled chocolate chip cookies. They were fresh baked, and just went, wow, I didn't realize how much I wanted a cookie. But the coming home and the crock pot is on, and it's probably done. It's probably been on a half hour too long or something, but just the smell has, and the smell is driving the neighbors nuts because they want some of that action. Like, the crock pot is where it's at.
Yeah.
Definitely the crock pot.
I brought a crock pot with me to training camp. That's how much I love crock pots.
And we went off on discussions about that over training camp, about how good of a decision that was to have a roast at training camp, especially with the questionable hours of food down there. Last question is from Tommy Gunn, who asks, if I were to expand my horizons in Italian meals beyond pasta and lasagna, what direction should I go?
Ignoring the fact that lasagna is technically a pasta, I'll let you go on that one, and ignoring the existence of pizza, which I think that you kind of don't want as an answer. There's a lot of places that you can go. I think that you could go in a seafood direction. I think there's a lot of really good, seafood dishes that are Italian that don't contain that much pasta or don't contain any pasta. You can go to, I think D'Amico Kitchen has a lot of, it's a local restaurant here in the Twin Cities. I think it has a lot of, exciting Italian food. Meatballs don't necessarily have to be served with pasta if they're good enough. Think of them as like a bunch of tiny meatloafs that are really good.
You could also go the soup route. There's a lot of great Italian soups,
a lot of great soups,
including the pasta fazool. But there's if you wanted to ignore the pasta aspect, there's still lots of great Italian soups out there that aren't even that terribly difficult to make either. Look at me sounding like Dusty. You could just make that and just make sure to steam the kale at this particular time in the cooking. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's Italian style like pot roast and stuff. For soups, I mean, like one of the more popular soups in Italy is the Italian wedding soup. I'm not as big a fan. A lot of people love it. I'm not as big a fan of it because they don't brown the meatballs in the soup. But like, you could make it and then brown the meatballs in the soup before putting it in the soup, and that could be pretty good. There's a lot of good things that you can have that are Italian that are not necessarily pasta, but also I think that a lot of the things that people have as Italian pasta are limited to like, chicken fettuccine and like spaghetti and meatballs. So like there are even kinds of pasta that just don't fit like that, whole thing that still tastes good. Viola Buco is a famous Italian dish that has no pasta in it that I like a lot.
Yeah, there's plenty of stuff that you can have. We could even break out the chicken parmesan if it tastes so good. It's just depending on what you want.
Yeah, chicken piccata, chicken parmesan. I like, what was that, gnocchi, which is technically potato pasta, but it doesn't taste like pasta. It's very good.
Yeah. Well, that is going to be it for the mailbag. Just a quick reminder, if there is something you would like to have put into the year-end episode, if there's a highlight or something we've talked about, just go ahead and tweet us. I've gotten a couple of requests to have things put in, including the discussion on nanobubbles. We will have to we'll have to trim that because that goes on for a little bit, but that's definitely something that's going to find its way into the mailbag or into the episode anyway. But yeah, if there is something you want to hear in that, just let me know. We're going to put some outtakes, going to put some best of stuff in there, and just to put something cool out for Christmas for you guys. So I'm looking forward to doing that. I've already started putting together part of it, so that'll be cool. Arif, do you have anything to plug before we get out of here?
Nope.
Absolutely nothing. Perfect. If you would like to contribute to the show, you can do so in one of two different ways. You can go to NorseCodePodcast.com. You can go down to the donate button at the bottom of the page, Go ahead and click on that. That's a PayPal link. Otherwise, you can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and become a sustaining member, sort of like NPR, where you can click on that and choose how much you would like to donate per month. If you find value in the podcast, if you like what you're hearing or want to keep us going, we really do appreciate the listener support. It keeps the ads off of the show. It keeps the sound quality as high as it's been these last few months. So again, thank you for all of that. But that is going to be it for us. If you'd like to follow Arif, you can do so at Arifasan NFL. You can follow myself at Big Mono. I also do the Norse Code Podcast Twitter account at NorseCodeDN. And you can follow Dusty, who will be on the show on Thursday night/Friday morning. He is at Dusty O'Connell. What we're gonna do is we're gonna have a show here this Wednesday morning. We're gonna have a show on Thursday morning previewing the game, and then Thursday night, Friday morning, we're going to have Dusty and Arif recapping the game. We're ambitious this week. I like it. This is all gonna end in tears, but we're gonna do this. Damn it. I don't know what the hell we're gonna do next week with you and I's early episode. Maybe we'll just cut that for sanity's sake or something. But we're gonna do that. We're gonna have some fun this week. So take a listen to us. We really do appreciate you guys, and send this to a Viking friend. Post it online. We appreciate all the listens. We appreciate the support we get from you guys. So again, thank you. But that is going to be it for us. So for Arif and Dusty, I am James, and our formula is this. Keep Teddy alive. We'll see you on Thursday.
Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SB Nation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.